Good morning, everyone. I'm going to keep this short because we all just want to listen to Bob. He needs no introduction, but I think the most interesting thing is that he's turning from a Mars engineer and an advocate into, I think, one of the more prominent public intellectuals in American political life. Please join me in welcoming the prolific author and founder and president of the Mars Society, Robert Zubrin. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And thanks for all of you for turning out this morning to hear what I have to say. I'm going to talk about humans to Mars within a decade, either a decade from now or a decade from whenever anyone finally turns on the money. Now, oh wow, okay, backwards, there we are. Okay, made some progress. This is a photograph that was taken on August 13th, 1998. And that is at the founding convention of the Mars Society. And what you're seeing there is Michael Griffin signing the founding declaration of the Mars Society, whose first sentence is, the time has come for humans to journey to Mars. We actually now have a NASA administrator who's one of us, who's not just some bureaucrat from central casting or some political camp follower that was drawn in, given a plum after someone won an election, or an executive suit from an aerospace company. We got somebody here who believes in the vision, who wants to make human settlement of the solar system a reality. Okay? So, and the reason why he's there is because of people like the National Space Society, like the Mars Society, who have fought to have a destination-driven NASA, who have impressed upon the political elite that the American people want to have a space program that is actually going somewhere and won't settle for anything less. And so the Bush administration, when they reformulated NASA's policy in 2004, realized if you're going to have a space program that's going somewhere, you got to have a NASA administrator who also wants a space program, who wants to go somewhere, which was not the case with Mr. Griffin's predecessor. And this is an example, by the way, of if you have the imperative, if there is the direction given to the space program that they really want results, the space agency will change. NASA, prior to Griffin, was like a peacetime military in which all the sycophants and doorknob polishers get into the high-ranking positions. But after being thrown into battle, and people are tested, after a short amount of time, you get rid of your McClellans and you bring in your Grants. This is Grant. But nevertheless, okay, despite that, the policy that Griffin is operating under right now is only a tentative vision for exploration. Bush did not embrace a goal of going to the moon and Mars with the same courage and commitment that Kennedy did in '61, where he said, I'm committing us to go to the moon within a decade, let's start working now. Instead he said, I'm committing us to go to the moon 12 years after I leave office so you can start working on it after I leave office, which is really not the same. But nevertheless, we have a nominal commitment. However, at this point, Mars, you have the moon on the agenda in twice the schedule that it took us to reach it the first time, and you have Mars off 3 decades from now. Now, how long does it really take? Would it really take us to reach Mars if we had political leadership that were truly committed to that goal? Well, that's like asking the question, backwards please. There we are. Maybe it might be good if you guys flip the charts, okay? All right, so here we are. It's like asking the question of how much rope is needed to connect 2 posts separated by a distance of 10 meters. In principle, it can take any amount of rope to connect 2 posts separated by a distance of 10 meters. But it can also be done with 10 meters of rope if you pull the rope tight. Okay? Now it's the same with the space exploration. Okay? The fundamental issue is whether you want to actually simply connect the posts or whether your goal is to sell rope. Okay? Now, our goal is to achieve results. Our goal is to connect the posts. Our goal is to establish humans on Mars for real as soon as possible, not to do as many other things as possible before that in order to maximize costs, maximize contractor payouts, and delay accept and challenge for as long as possible. Okay? But the difference is whether you actually want to connect the posts and want to sell rope. So there's a bunch of rope sales going on right now that those of us who want to see humans on Mars are going to have to fight through. Okay? For example, next chart. Here's rope sale number 1. Okay? And this is the rope sale that President Bush advanced in his speech when he announced the vision for space exploration under the advice of prior Administrator O'Keefe that we need to go to the moon before we go to Mars because you want to launch Mars missions from the moon because the moon has lower gravity and it's easier to launch from the moon than from Mars. And so therefore, before we go to Mars, we should build a new Cape Canaveral on the moon. Now, it is true that it's easier to launch from Mars from the moon than it is from Earth, but before the spacecraft launches from the moon, it has to get to the moon, which means it has to be launched from Earth in the first place. And because the delta V's to reach the lunar surface from a low Earth orbit are actually greater than the delta V's to reach the Martian surface from low Earth orbit, even if there was a Cape Canaveral in existence on the moon right now, with complete facilities manned by people who would work for free, giving out rocket fuel for free to anyone who would drop by, it would still make no sense to go to the moon on your way to Mars because it would cost you more to get to this free fuel lunar base than it would just to go to Mars. So this program does not make any sense. And here's another rope sale, next chart. Okay. Advanced propulsion. Sean O'Keefe was a proponent of fantastical forms of propulsion. He was nuclear electric propulsion, in which he actually testified in congressional testimony that with nuclear electric propulsion you could get to Mars in 60 days instead of the current 6 months. Well, in reality, if you use the nuclear electric propulsion system that they were proposing to develop, not that they had, because they don't actually have any nuclear electric propulsion system, but if you did the one that they hoped to develop for the Jupiter Icy Moon Orbiter mission, it would take 5 years to get from low Earth orbit to Mars. So instead of the current 6 months. So this made no sense at all. This was just a program to come up with basically an indefinite advanced technology development in order to throw money around and defer accepting the challenge to Mars on the basis of the excuse that the optimum technology was not yet available. By the way, you'll notice this ship is very large. Mars is there for scale. Next chart. Then, of course, there is the argument not of building Cape Canaverals on the moon, but that we want to go to the moon to use it as a place where we can practice Mars missions. Well, you certainly could practice Mars missions on the moon, but you can do the same thing in the Arctic for 1/1000th the cost. Okay? So, and then, frankly, there's an infinite sequence, an infinite number of alternative activities one could do before one goes to Mars if you choose to delay. You could want to build the balloon-carried bases in the Earth's stratospheres, or interplanetary way stations in heliocentric space, or bases on Phobos, which, by the way, is in an equatorial orbit, which means you've got to do a massive delta V to go from there to any place on Mars other than the equator. It's the worst place to put a Mars orbital base. But people come up with it and don't want to accept the challenge of Mars. That if you want to go to Mars, you got to go to Mars. Okay, that's all there is to it. So how can we actually go to Mars with current day technology? Can it really be done? The answer is yes. Next chart. Okay, now any space launch program needs an appropriate launch vehicle, and when we designed the Mars Direct program, back when we came up with a launch vehicle, a heavy lift launch vehicle, shuttle derived, which we call the Ares. And there it is, We offset the shuttle main engines in that odd way because we figured the Ares was going to be used in parallel with the shuttle, and therefore you have paths with the flame trenches offset in that position. If the shuttle is being retired as it is, you put them under it, and this in fact is the design that NASA has now come up with for the Ares vehicle that they're calling the Ares vehicle. But now it is true that developing a heavy lift vehicle to facilitate lunar missions, that is a piece of hardware that can also be used on Mars missions. So in that sense, the lunar program would help Mars in a sense of hardware commonality. Or put another way, if you're developing the hardware you need to go to Mars, you can also use it to go to the moon, which I think is the way it should be approached. But a vehicle like this is entirely doable. It requires no new technology. And it's a Saturn V equivalent. It could throw 47 tons on a direct trajectory to Mars or 59 to the moon. You don't need to go to orbit and transfer your cargo to a giant interplanetary spaceship out of the science fiction special effects department at NASA. You just can lift the payload and throw it to the destination just like we did in Apollo, or just as we've done on a smaller scale with every real unmanned planetary mission. And if you can do the Mars mission that way, by the way, with a simple lift and throw strategy, right there, you've gone 90% of the way towards debunking the idea of the Mars mission as an enterprise that has to be done in the science fiction future and moving it into our world of brass tacks engineering. Next chart. So if we have a vehicle like this, which we can readily build, we know we can build it. We built similar vehicles 40 years ago. Okay. And if they can do it, we can do it. Or we have to insist that if they can do it, we can do it, because we cannot afford to become less than the kind of people who built this country, who launched the space program, who settled the frontier, who opened up the eastern seaboard in the first place. This is how you do a Mars mission. You do it in a sequence. You can launch to Mars every 2 years. Actually, every 26 months there's a launch window to Mars. Year 1, 3, 5 on this chart represent year 1 is the first year of active flight operations, 3 is 2 years after that. If we were serious about this, okay, if the next president was to get up in 2009 and say, I'm committing the nation to send humans to Mars, okay, year 1 on this chart could be 2014, year 3 could be 2016. I'm not saying that is necessarily going to happen. It's us to make that happen. But if that did happen, those would be the dates that could be. So in a given year, 2014, we launch one of these boosters off the Cape, and we use that upper stage to throw an unmanned payload to Mars on a minimum energy trajectory. It takes 8 months to get there. Okay, next chart. Okay, what is it that is thrown to Mars? There's a number of things in the payload. The primary object is an Earth return vehicle, depicted here, which Earth return vehicle is a little rocket ship for returning a crew from Mars to Earth in the final leg of the mission. However, no one is in it now. It consists of a small cabin with tight quarters for a crew of 4 for a 6-month voyage from Mars back to Earth, and then 2 methane oxygen rocket propulsion stages, which also are unfueled. They have to be unfueled, or this thing would move. Please do not advance the chart. Yeah. Excuse me. They have to be unfueled, or this would weigh 4 times as much as it does. However, in some of the lower stage tanks that are later going to contain methane, it has about 6 tons of liquid hydrogen, probably in gelled form. And then slung below the vehicle, not shown in this diagram, is a light truck, runs on a methane oxygen engine. In the back of the truck, got a little nuclear reactor with a power of about 100 kilowatts. Now, 100 kilowatts is like 130 horsepower. It's the same amount of power that powers an average car. So we're not talking about a giant nuclear power plant here that powers a city. We're just talking about a nice little putt-putt nuke sitting in the back of the truck. Okay. So after the thing is landed, the truck is driven a couple of 100 yards away. It has to be driven slow like the Mars rovers because it's a time lag. It signals from Earth to Mars. But we have time. We drive a couple of 100 yards. We put the reactor on the ground, preferably in a little crater or a ditch or on the reverse side of the hill. Anything to put a nice chunk of dirt between the reactor and the main landing area. And then we turn the reactor on, and now we have power of the ship. Next chart. And what we do then is we run a pump, and we suck in the Martian air, which is basically carbon dioxide gas. Carbon dioxide can be reacted with hydrogen in the presence of a catalyst that will produce methane, CH4, and water, H2O. Methane's great rocket fuel. We store it in our tank. Water can be electrolyzed, and in the second reaction, split hydrogen and oxygen. The oxygen is the oxidizer that we're going to use. The hydrogen we recycle to make more methane. And because we want additional oxygen to get the right mixture ratio, we have a third reactor in which you take carbon dioxide and you split it into carbon monoxide and oxygen. The oxygen we keep is used for oxidizer. The carbon monoxide we vent as waste. You can't do that on Mars. There's no EPA there. So when you're all done, what you've managed to do is take 6 tons of hydrogen from Earth and turn it into 108 tons of methane oxygen rocket propellant on the surface of Mars. That's a leverage of 18 to 1. It's like being able to buy gasoline for 20 cents a gallon. Or perhaps to stick with a more useful analogy, it's like a pioneer being able to acquire the useful mass of a bison for the transported mass of several volts and cartridges. And that's what makes the whole mission sing. 95% of your return propellant is actually coming from mass that is on Mars. Only 5% that you have to bring from Earth. And because we can make so much propellant, we make extra propellant that we can use to power ground vehicles, high-powered ground vehicles, driven by methane oxygen engines. And these have much more power and therefore speed and range than you can get with electric-powered vehicles. And that's important too. In other words, the ability to make fuels on Mars out of local materials is not only the key to making the mission cheap, it's also the key to making the mission effective. Okay? And that is equally important because there's no point going to Mars unless you can do something useful when you get there. And the key to effective exploration is mobility. And the key to mobility is to be able to live off the land. And that's our approach that we're taking here. Next chart. And we've built demonstration units that can do this. Next chart. Now, okay, it took 8 months for that thing, the Earth return vehicle, to fly to Mars. It took 10 months to make the propellant. That's 18 months. There's 26 months between launch windows from Earth to Mars. So long before the next launch window has opened up, we will know that we have a fully fueled Earth return vehicle sitting, waiting for us on the surface of Mars. Okay? That being the case, at the next launch window, 2016, okay, before the end of the next president's second term, we launch 2 more boosters off the gate. One sends another Earth return vehicle with no one in it. The other sends a habitat with a crew of 4 astronauts in it. Now, because our return ride is waiting for us on the surface of Mars, we don't need to fly to Mars in a giant Death Star-sized spaceship. Okay? We don't even need to fly to Mars in a comparatively modest Millennium Falcon. No, we can fly to Mars in, next chart, a tuna can. And that is very fortunate, ladies and gentlemen, because we know how to build tuna cans, and they have been proven in commerce to be a wonderful shape for packaging purposes. Now, our tuna can is somewhat larger than the standard chicken of the sea unit. This is 27 feet in diameter and 16 feet tall, so it's got 2 decks, each with 8 feet of headroom. The upper deck is where people really live, the lower deck is more of a cargo workshop, storage kind of place. Next chart. Here's one proposed layout for the upper deck of the HAB. You see you have 4 little staterooms for each of the 4 astronauts. In the crew, you have some public areas for exercise science, the galley wardroom area, and in the center, the circular area, the center, that's the solar flare storm shelter. Okay, now, there's 2 kinds of radiation that can get you in interplanetary space. The solar flares and cosmic rays. They're quite different from each other. Solar flares come from the sun. They come unpredictably. You might have a big one about once a year. And in the course of several hours, they can deliver several thousand rems of radiation to an unshielded astronaut, which is enough to kill. And that's the bad news, okay? Now, the good news, however, is the kind of radiation that solar flares are made of are protons, with energies on the order of a few million volts. And that kind of stuff can be stopped. It can be stopped by 5 inches of water, or things that from the nuclear point of view are essentially the same thing as water, such as food, or things that water and food become as the mission unfolds. And we have enough of that stuff on board the ship to pack it in around a limited central area and shield it completely against solar flares. So a solar flare happens, the alarm bell rings, everybody goes into the shelter. They're in there pretty tight for a few hours, but like New Yorkers who ride the subway know how to handle this, and you wouldn't have solicitors coming through. If you do, then you have another problem. But but anyway, you're stuck in there for a few hours, and then the all clear rings, you come out, and that's how you handle solar flares. Solar flares were a terror for Apollo because Apollo was traveling light. They were only going to be out for a week or so. They only had a very small amount of provisions with them. They were not shielded against solar flares. They were just counting upon the probability that no big solar flare would happen during the week or so duration of a round-trip Apollo mission. And of course, none did. Could have, but it didn't. On a Mars mission, on the other hand, since the total duration of the mission is 2.5 years, you have lots of provisions on board, enough to shield yourself. So you don't need to take extra mass for shielding. You can use the mass you need to bring anyway for shielding. And that's how you protect yourself against solar flares. Now, cosmic rays are different. Cosmic rays don't come from the sun. They come from interstellar space. They come zipping into the solar system with energies not of millions of volts, but billions of volts. So you can't stop cosmic rays with 5 inches of water. It would take more like meters of water to stop cosmic rays. So you're going to take their dose. That's the bad news. The good news, however, is that the magnitude of the dose just isn't that large. It's around 50 or 60 grams for a round-trip Mars mission. You're going to take in cosmic rays. That represents roughly a 1% risk of getting a fatal cancer at some point later in your life, given no advancing medical technology. That's a certain kind of risk, but you need to understand that right now, if you're an average American and if you don't smoke, you have a 20% chance of dying of cancer. This would make it 21. If you're an average American smoker, it's 40. So if we recruited the crew out of smokers and sent them to Mars without their tobacco, we would be reducing their chance of getting cancer. So, in fact, one good reason to send people to Mars might be for their health. Now, another thing that you'll notice about this hab is that it has a very conventional layout. It's got a table and chairs and shelves and a sink. This thing is designed to be used in a gravity environment. It can operate with 0G, and it does for a few brief phases in various intermediate maneuvers of the mission. But mostly it operates in gravity, because we're going to land this thing on Mars. We're going to use this as our house on Mars, where there is gravity at 38% Earth levels. And on our way to Mars, next chart, we're going to make gravity by spinning the spacecraft. Okay? You can make artificial gravity with centrifugal force. In this case, we do it by tethering off the burnt-out upper stage of the booster that threw us to Mars. That's now an effective counterweight at the end of a mile-long tether. We spin this thing at 1 RPM, and we can create artificial gravity. And see, there have been no radiological health effects observed on any crews of Mir or the space station or Salyut or Skylab. None. There have been zero gravity health effects observed, deconditioning from zero gravity. Okay? And the simplest way to solve that problem is just to spin this spacecraft and not have zero gravity. And you really want to do that. Because, yes, you could survive with a 6-month transit to Mars in zero gravity. 6 months is a standard shift on the space station, and so people certainly survive. But it deconditions you. And the exploration activity the crew is going to do is heavily physical in nature, hiking around unimproved terrain in a spacesuit. And their effectiveness will be in proportion to their physical condition. So you want to go to Mars in artificial gravity. And frankly, solving the simple mechanical problems of deploying and operating a rotating spacecraft is much, much simpler than solving the problem of human physiological adaptation to zero gravity. No comparison. Next chart. Okay, so we're flying out to Mars. We're on a medium energy trajectory. It takes 6 months to get to Mars. When we get close to Mars, we fire a pyro bolt that cuts the cable. The upper stage goes away into interplanetary space. The crew comes aerobraking into Mars' atmosphere to capture into orbit. After we check them out, we check out the weather and make sure everything's good. We bring them back into the atmosphere on a second pass, plowing deeper. The aeroshell takes us down to subsonic speeds, and we pop a parachute, come down slow, put ourselves down soft with retro rockets, just like Viking did in 1976. And we're on Mars, deployed at the site of the Earth return vehicle. Okay, the first one we sent to Mars. We're going to do a surface rendezvous. Now, there are people here who can remember Apollo. Others have read about it. During Apollo, we actually landed an Apollo lunar lander within 200 yards of a Surveyor spacecraft that had been landed a few years before. And we've got much better guidance systems today. We should be able to hit this thing on the nose. We've got a radar beacon on the ground to draw us in. We've got an ace flying the thing. And we've got excellent guidance systems. We should be able to hit it. But let's say you don't. Let's say you land 10, 20, 30 miles away. That would be very large landing errors. We're still okay, because we have with us in the lower deck of the Hab a pressurized ground roving vehicle about the size of a 4x4 that has a one-way drive powered on a methane oxygen engine, one-way driving range 600 miles. It would really take piss poor piloting to land outside of that radius of action. But let's say you did. Let's say you landed on the wrong side of the planet. That would represent a very serious problem in the pilot selection process at NASA. If you did, you could still save the mission because we got the other Earth return vehicle following them out to Mars, and if they land on the wrong side of the planet, we can bring that one down to land here then because it's not being piloted by the nephew of the center director. Now in that case, we would be depending upon the chemical synthesis gear to work in real time instead of back time, which is the mission baseline. But the success of the technology has already been proven by the first lander, and we do have a human crew on the scene to adjust the chemical gear should it malfunction while they are there. Of course, in this case, you wouldn't want to have the pilot / nephew being among those doing the adjustments. But you have 3 other crew members, and they should be able to handle it. So it is a pretty good 3rd level mission backup. And finally, as a 4th level mission backup, if you can't land accurately, if you can't drive there, if you can't use the Earth return vehicle, our 4th level mission backup is that we got the whole crew landed on Mars, where they've got natural gravity, where they've got substantial radiation protection offered by the Martian environment, and they got enough supplies with them to last for 3 years. So that if worst comes to worst, they just tough it out on the surface of Mars until the next launch window opens up in 2018, and more supplies and another Earth return vehicle can be fired out to them at that time. So what we have here is a 4-layer defense in depth, and each layer involves successfully carrying off the mission. This is a different mission philosophy, by the way, than was done in Apollo. Okay? In Apollo, the mission philosophy was not backup options, but abort options. They had what they called an abort tree, which is a very complex logic thing, and some high-priced contractors got lots of money for flow charting this all out. But basically, what it amounted to was if something goes wrong, they quit and go home. But on Mars, you can't do that. Once you're on trans-Mars injection, it is physically impossible to get back to Earth in less than 2 years. Okay? It's physically impossible. That's decreed by God and Isaac Newton and their students. And that's how it is. So you can't do a Mars mission with abort options. You've got to do it with backup options. It's really more akin to a military tactical philosophy of you have primary plans, you have contingency plans, but whatever you do, you're going to take that beach because those landing craft don't want to go backwards. And that's how this has to go. Okay. So, but let's say the plan works as it should. You land at landing site number 1, the Earth return vehicle is there. You already had an automated health checkout on it before you ever left the Earth, but now you're there yourself, you can kick the tires, see it's in great shape. We don't need a second Earth return vehicle. What do we do with it? Well, we land it somewhere else, landing site number 2, which could be anywhere on the planet or right next door. I would propose to land it a few hundred miles away, because it's going to define a new landing site, which we'd like to be in a new area to explore, but we'd like to have it at least within one-way driving range of available ground transportation. So that if the crew wants, they have available to them 2 complete Earth return vehicles, either one of which can take them home. And they also have 3 places they can live in if they have to. The big cab, as well as the cabins in the 2 Earth return vehicles. So they're multiply backed up. But the real purpose of that second Earth return vehicle is not to serve them at all. It is to prepare the next Mars mission, which will fly out to it in 2018, along with another Earth return vehicle, which is their backup, but which otherwise opens up landing site number 3. So the idea here is that every 2 years you launch 2 boosters off the Cape. One to open up a new site, one to exploit a previously open site. 2 boosters every 2 years is an average of 1 per year to support a continuous program of human exploration of Mars. Okay. Now, if we can launch these heavy lift vehicles, these shuttle-derived heavy lift vehicles, at the same rate we can launch shuttles when shuttles are really flying, which is 6 a year, Okay, it means we're only using 1/6 of our heavy lift capability to support an ongoing Mars program. That means we can do this in parallel with other objectives, including a lunar base, asteroid missions, you name it. We can design a set of hardware that will do Mars, but which will simultaneously allow us to do various other objectives of interest. Okay? That's how you do it if you're going to do this right. Next chart. Okay, this is an actual photograph of the Mars base. What you see there, the conical ship, is the Earth return vehicle. In the background in the crater is the reactor. Also, some of the background over to the side are solar panels the crew brings out with them as backup power if they have to turn the reactor off. The large tuna can have as their primary habitat. Next to it is a little pressurized rover, which, by the way, also provides backup power for the base by running its engine if that's what you need to do. Off over in the shadow of the Earth return vehicle, you might not be able to see it well, is the light truck that was used to deploy the reactor. It's another backup vehicle for the pressurized rover. And in the foreground is an inflatable greenhouse. That is not a mission critical item, that's an experiment in learning how to grow crops on the Martian surface, in Martian soil, Martian water, Martian gravity, Martian sunlight, for the benefit of future missions and future bases. Now, we're going to be on Mars for a year and a half. Why a year and a half? Because that's how long you have to be on Mars in order to get a good launch when we go back to Earth. So the mission plan is 6 months out, 6 months back, year and a half on the Martian surface. That's known as a conjunction mission plan. There's an alternative mission plan which you could use, which NASA bureaucrats sometimes revert to, which is known as an opposition class mission. That mission involves about 1.9 years in interplanetary space and only 30 days on the Martian surface. Okay? It has larger delta V's, larger propulsion requirements than the conjunction mission, and it has only 1/20th the time on Mars. But it does get you back home in 2 years instead of 2.5. I think that's a very foolish mission plan. It's proposed by people who use a metric for designing Mars missions, that the best Mars mission is minimum time away from home. Okay? Well, I think if your goal is to minimize your time away from home, just don't leave. Okay? The goal of a Mars mission is not to minimize your time away from home. The goal of a Mars mission is to explore Mars. And the correct metric for a Mars mission, the best simple metric anyway, is person days on Mars divided by tons in low Earth orbit. Person days on Mars being a simple, a crude metric of the productivity of the mission, tons in low Earth orbit being a crude metric of the cost. Okay? Divided by cost, that exploration per dollar. Okay, that's it. And if you want to use that metric, conjunction wins by a landslide. It's a cheaper mission and it does 20 times the exploration. So we're on Mars a year and a half. Okay? What are we going to do on Mars in a year and a half? Well, we're going to explore. We're going to explore all kinds of things about Mars. Okay? There's lots of things people want to know about Mars, but there's 2 central issues about Mars. They both deal with life. The question of was there life on Mars? Next chart. Okay, here's actually, this photograph was returned by the Viking orbiter in 1976. Okay, and this is photograph. And what you see here are dry riverbeds on the surface of Mars. We saw them in less convincing form actually in Mariner 9 back in '71. Viking was absolutely convincing. But there are dry riverbeds on Mars, and as Steve Squires pointed out yesterday, they have found all kinds of other water-related features on Mars: silicate deposits, evaporite deposits, sedimentary rocks, as seen directly by the rovers. The more recent orbiters have detected continent-sized regions on Mars in which the soil is over 60% water by weight. Okay? Now that's very different from the Moon, where water is detected on parts per million basis. You're talking about soil that is majority water, okay, as wet as any soil on Earth, okay? And in fact, the evidence right now is that there is enough water on Mars that if you melted it all out and smoothed the planet over, okay, you could put the whole planet under an ocean 600 feet deep, okay? Now that's actually dry compared to the Earth. If the Earth was smoothed over, we'd be under 6,000 feet of water, okay? But that's because the Earth is an ocean world. If you got rid of the Earth's saltwater oceans and just looked at the fresh water, there's about as much water on Mars as there is on Earth, okay, in terms of water per acre. Okay. So And there were certainly bodies of water on Mars, rivers, lakes, oceans at one time, and for perhaps a period of 1 billion years in the planet's early history, which is 5 times as long as it took for life to appear on Earth after there was liquid water here. So if the conjecture is correct that life is a natural evolution from chemistry, wherever you have all the right elements and water and reasonable temperatures and a sufficient period of time, then life should have also appeared on Mars. And if we can go to Mars, and if we can find fossils of that past life, I mean, even if it disappeared from the surface after conditions deteriorated and the place froze up, if you can find fossils, microfossils, what you will have proven is the development of life from chemistry is a general phenomenon in the universe wherever an appropriate environment exists. And since we now know that planetary systems around stars are probably more the rule than the exception, we've discovered over 200 extrasolar planets, and every star has a correct distance from it, near or far, depending upon the brightness of the star, where you have the right temperatures for liquid water. If life will develop wherever it has a decent planet, it means life is everywhere. Okay? And since the entire history of life on Earth is one of development from simpler forms to more complex forms, manifesting progressively greater capacity for activity and intelligence and ever more rapid evolution. If life is everywhere, it means intelligence is everywhere. It means we're living in an inhabited universe. It means we're not alone. This is really worth finding out. Okay? On the other hand, if we go to Mars and we find that, yeah, look at all these sedimentary rocks here and all these dry lake beds and all this stuff, dry oceans, but no fossils of any kind, not even microbes. No life developed despite the fact that it would seem that all the physical conditions existed. That could mean that the development of life from chemistry is a much, much rarer thing, that we were the result of a 1 in a trillion chance thing of the atoms all coming together to form DNA or something, and its weird structure and everything. And it was just a miracle, and we could be entirely alone in the universe. That's also worth finding out. So this is going to take human explorers on the scene to do. Furthermore, if we have human explorers on the scene, we can go beyond this. We can set up drilling rigs and drill down several hundred meters into the soil where there is liquid water underground now. There is no liquid water on Mars. There is liquid water in Mars. Okay? And there's a lot of geological evidence that support that, including photographs taken by the Mars orbiters within the past 10 years that showed a water runoff out of the side of a crater that occurred within the lifetime of the MGS spacecraft. That is, since 1997, water flowed out of the side of the crater down the side, which means there has to be a reservoir of liquid water underground there that could break out of the side of the crater, and if it wasn't there, it could be anywhere on Mars. There's liquid water underground on Mars. On Earth, most life on Earth is actually underground. Actually, most of the Earth is underground. But and the same is true on Mars. Most of Mars is underground. And there's liquid water there. And if there was ever life on the surface of Mars, the chances are excellent that it could have retreated into these underground reservoirs after the surface froze up. And if we could sample that water and bring that water into a lab in our little lab on Mars, put it under the microscope and examine its biochemistry and its structure, we'd be able to see whether life as it appeared on Mars is the same as life on Earth, or is it something substantially different. Okay? See, all life on Earth is the same at the biochemical level. Whether you're talking about bacteria, oak trees, clams, people, okay, you guys are all alike. Okay, you all use RNA and DNA and the same set of amino acids. You're all made of the same bricks. It's just put together in different ways. Okay, but while there's a pretty good argument that carbon and water as the basic chemistry of life has a lot of advantages over anything else you might choose, certainly this particular set of amino acids and RNA and DNA is very particular, and there's no a priori reason why it has to be the way in which life is constructed. And so is it the case? Okay, is life on Earth the nature of life everywhere, or are we just one peculiar example of a much vaster and more varied tapestry? That's also really worth finding out. And you can only find that out with human explorers on Mars. So, next chart. Okay, well, Anyway, you're going to be on Mars for a year and a half. At the end of that time, you get in the Earth return vehicle, start it up, take off, and you fly back to Earth. You leave on Mars your habitat and your reactor and your vehicles and all the rest of that stuff. Okay? So each time you go to Mars, you leave behind a miniature base. So here you are at the end of 8 missions to Mars, and this is a map of Mars. You can see Texas is there for scale. And I regret to inform you that despite claims of others, local here, Mars is bigger than Texas, as you can see. But each of these regions with a 300-mile radius of exploration it defines a region about the size of Texas that could be explored. And the vehicles have enough range to reach from the center of each of these circles, which is where the landing sites are, to the next one over. So you've got a string of miniature bases on Mars. You're opening up continent-sized regions on Mars to human exploration. Now, in addition to exploring for natural phenomena, of course, we're also prospecting Mars for resources. And at the end of a series of these missions, we're going to know the truth about whether there was life on Mars, whether there is life on Mars, what it was like, how far it managed to get. Okay? And then at that point, the real question about Mars is going to advance to question number 2, which is not, was there life on Mars, or is there life on Mars? It's, will there be life on Mars? Next chart. Okay? Because, look, the most important thing there is to know about Mars is this, is that Mars is not just an object of scientific inquiry. It is that, okay, it's the Rosetta Stone for letting us know the truth about the nature and role of life in the universe. But it's more than that. What Mars actually is a world. Okay, it is a planet with a surface equal to in size to all the continents of the Earth put together, that has on it all the resources needed to support life and therefore technological civilization. And if we can go to Mars and learn how to make use of those resources, okay, then we can make Mars habitable. Now, what do I mean by make Mars habitable? Do I mean terraform the planet, you know, like in Star Trek 2, the search for Spock where you plane stay on the planet? Anyway, and you might not use that technique, but in effect, you manage to transform the planet and take a desert world and fill it with forests and meadows and butterflies and flowers and skylarks and chipmunks and flying fish. Yes. That is what I mean. And I believe that humans will do that to Mars someday. And the reason why I believe that is because we're life, and it's the nature of life to take barren environments and transform them into those that are favorable for the development and propagation of life. That is the entire history of life on Earth. Okay, you know, the oxygen in the Earth's atmosphere, which makes animals like us possible, that is an artifact of life. It's created by plants. There was no free oxygen in the early Earth's atmosphere. And the soil on the continents that make possible advanced plants, that is also an artifact of life. And the symbiotic communities of life, of plants, animals, microbes, have transformed the Earth. They transformed the continent, starting on the seashore, up the plains, up the hills, up the mountains. As high up as life can go, it goes. And no sooner does any barren place, a sterile place, appears on the surface of the Earth than life takes it on. You know, like take Hawaii, for example. Okay, popping out of the Pacific Ocean, this huge island of bare, sterile basalt. No sooner does it appear than birds fly over and they drop seeds, so the place becomes lush. Okay, and then Polynesians show up and let loose pigs, so there's something good to eat. And then Europeans show up and build hotels. Okay, you know, so there's a place to check in. Okay, this is what we do. Okay, it's what we do. Okay, and it would be unnatural, absolutely unnatural, if human beings, as the form of life, as the bird, as it were, that the Earth's biosphere has evolved, that is capable of flying across interplanetary space and depositing the seeds of life on the islands out there, it'd be unnatural if we did not do exactly that. So we will do that someday. But unfortunately, that task is beyond the technology of our time. Okay? So while we, the people in this room, can be among those who establish that first foothold on Mars, the actual physical transformation of Mars is for another age. Okay? Nevertheless, we who are here can have the honor of transforming Mars, making it habitable in a different sense, by transforming it not so much physically as intellectually. Because what defines whether an environment is habitable or not? Okay, it's not just the physical character of the environment, it's also you, it's what you have in your mind. Okay, I mean, are the woods of the American wilderness habitable? Well, to who? Two people could be stranded on those woods and one could starve to death in 3 weeks and the other could live there indefinitely in relative comfort. And the difference is the craft that they have in their mind. One can see the resources that are available in the woods and to the other they're invisible. So if we can go to Mars and develop the craft of living on Mars, if we can develop the art, not only of using the atmosphere to make fuel and oxygen, but to go beyond that, let's use the soil, let's extract water from the soil, better yet geothermally heated water from the deep subsurface, which both give us more water and some power. Let's learn how to grow plants on Mars in Martian soil, learn how to make ceramics, glasses, plastics, metals, wires, tubes, habitation structures. If we can ascend that ladder of craft, we develop a set of abilities that allow human beings to settle on Mars, to be self-sufficient on Mars. And once that happens, then in the fullness of time, new branches of human civilization can take root on Mars, which will grow over time to the point where they will be able to address the question of physically transforming Mars. And so we don't just bring life to Mars, we bring Mars to life. Next chart. The moon, we've already talked about. Next chart. Well, the only thing I want to say about the moon is that you can use the Mars Direct vehicles to also build lunar bases. And as I said, if we adopt an approach like this, the same set of hardware that allows us to do Mars will also allow us to do the moon and the asteroids too. That's the right way to go about it. If you design instead a set of hardware that's limited to the moon, you only get the moon, and Mars becomes put off for a generation. If you design a set of hardware that's designed for Mars, you also get the moon. It's just like Apollo. The Apollo hardware allowed us to do the moon. It also allowed us to launch Skylab, a space station, in the afternoon. Okay? But instead, if we had designed the space station program, we never would have gotten beyond low Earth orbit. Okay? So here's the primary set of tools you need to establish humans on the moon and Mars. A good launch vehicle, good HAB module, and a good Earth return vehicle. It uses 2 stages to come back from Mars, 1 stage to come back from the moon, and an aeroshell that you would only use on Mars. You wouldn't want to use an aeroshell on the moon unless it was made in a politically influential district. Anyway, so this is what we need to open up 2 new worlds. Now, so this is possible. This is within our grasp. But just because something is possible doesn't mean it will happen. Things happen because people make them happen. Okay? And that's why the Mars Society was set up, to choose a goal and say, let's actually make this happen. Okay? Next chart. Okay? So we do 3 things. We do public outreach, spreading the vision, people giving talks like I'm giving here now. We meet with political representatives, and we've initiated projects of our own, which are the most important have been the building of simulated Mars stations in the American Arctic and in the desert. This is our station in the high Arctic. Next chart. Where we practice Mars missions. We also do this in the desert. We're taking volunteers, by the way. We've about 400 volunteers have actually served in simulated Mars missions in the desert and in the Arctic. It's an open call for volunteers on our website. Most of these missions have been 2 weeks in duration. I led one month duration Arctic mission. But right now, next chart, the Mars Society has begun a 4-month Mars mission simulation in the high Arctic. Okay, this is actually getting into the range. As I said, a human Mars mission would be on the Martian surface for 1.5 years. 4 months is not quite there, but it's a substantial chunk of that. Okay, for 4 months, this crew of 7 people in the high Arctic, and they're there right now as we speak. They just landed there 2 weeks ago. They're conducting a sustained program of field exploration in geology and microbiology, operating in telescience collaboration with our mission support team. Next chart. To try to maximize their science output, coping with all the problems of field science, lab science, repair of equipment, chores of daily life, getting along with each other, getting along and collaborating with mission support and remote science team that a real Mars mission would do. Okay, this, by the way, is being done 95% on private money. We do have some NASA support. And through this, we hope to learn a lot about how humans will have to handle things when they go to Mars, and we also hope to make the vision of human planetary exploration real to millions of people who are going to read about this in the media. So there are things you can do, okay, and there are things you should do. Okay, history is not a spectator sport. Okay, if you want humans to Mars to happen, you need to take responsibility. I invite you to join us. Thank you. Now, that was a lot of ground to cover, and I couldn't completely explain everything in the Mars mission or how we do Mars mission simulations in a talk at this length. But fortunately, as you may have heard, I have written a couple of books on the subject. So after this talk, you're interested in finding out more, you buy them, I'll sign them. It's a win-win situation. I also invite you to come to the Mars Society Convention, which is going to be at UCLA this year in Los Angeles, August 30th through September 2nd. You've probably seen the flyers passed around. You can even talk there. There's an open call for papers. Submit an abstract before June 30th, and you may be able to talk there as well. But I'll take a question or two right now. Sir.
You mentioned what you can make
Wait, just let him ask the question, I'll repeat it.
You mentioned that you can make food from in situ resources, like fuel from in situ resources, like carbon dioxide. What do you do about food?
Okay, on early Mars mission, he asked, we can make fuel and oxygen from in situ resources, what about food? On early Mars missions, it's simpler just to take the food. The food does not really weigh that much, especially if you bring it out in dehydrated form. You do have to recycle the water. The technology exists to do that now, because the water weighs much more than the food. Next chart, next question.
Bob, referring to your slide with the cluster of habitats, in your mind, after year one, what year would be the one you would start clustering habitats like that?
That's a somewhat open question. I mean, there are even people that want to do it starting on the second mission. I believe that we should explore a variety of places before we choose where we're going to go with our substantial base. But my own preference would be after 6 or 7 missions, we choose a place where we say, this is the best place, let's build up here. Next question.
Hey, Bob, we just did some work on the lunar architecture and read the Hughes report on the Apollo 12, the camera that was brought back from Surveyor. And Apollo 12 landed 155 meters from Surveyor, and the impact to the Surveyor from the Apollo 12 landing was over 40 to 60 meters a second of debris. What are you thinking about? Have you thought about that? And what do you think is the closest safe distance to land?
Well, it's a little closer on Mars than the Moon, because Mars has a bigger gravity and it also has an atmosphere which can decelerate fine, small particles quite well. It may be like 500 meters, I would think, but studies need to be done to know for sure. I'll take one more question, and then we do have some books right over there if people want to pick them up. Any other questions?
Yes, I have one. I was intrigued by the comment on how it is, in fact, a natural process to go and bring life to another planet. Could you elaborate more on the fact that a lot of the environmental community in particular, which is sort of my background, seem to think that it is a bad thing for humans to go out into another world and do to that world what we've done in this world?
Well, I think that is a misunderstanding of environmentalism, because look, if it can be said that humans are degrading either the Earth as a whole or even a particular environment, take your pick, one particular place on Earth, then there is, in some sense, an absolute scale in which we say that one environment is better than another. So therefore, if an environment can be degraded, it can also be improved. I think everyone in that environmental movement would agree that it would be a horrible thing if people were to take Earth as it is today and transform it into a dead or nearly dead desert world like Mars is today. So that would be an incredible environmental crime. Well, similarly, if you could do the reverse, if you could take a world in the shape of Mars today and transform it into a wonderful living planet like the Earth, then surely that would be an environmental miracle, something to be wondered at and striven for rather than abhorred. the idea that because there's people doing it, it must be bad, and there's no validity to that, and that has to be rejected. Okay, if we can degrade environments, we can improve environments. And truly, a living world is better than a dead one. Thank you.